All the teachers are in the room now, so I can start. So we're all on the same schedule. Just one announcement for you tonight. Chris wanted me to mention that the yard sale, the next church yard sale, is the 29th and 30th of this month, so at the very end of the month. So if you got stuff to gather, you got 2 weeks to put it all together and start bringing it over. And I think they're starting to store stuff down in the basement of the parsonage. So if you have stuff already ready, you can go ahead and start bringing it, and that'll be the 29th and the 30th. And, of course, we'll get more details as it gets a little bit closer. We'll open with prayer. Dear Lord, I thank you for just the beautiful weather and the opportunity to come and gather in fellowship and now to study the Scripture and study your Word. And we thank you for all the lessons that we've learned so far through what you spoke through Paul. And I just pray over tonight's message that as we look at it a little bit more, that you'll continue to bless us and that we'll be able to take what we learn and what we gather and what we reap from this Scripture, and we'll be able to apply it tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. So, tonight we bring 1 Corinthians to a close, or you thought, and so did I. There's a little bit of a plot twist. So I thought last week, if you're like me, you're a planner, and I mentioned that. I've already talked about that. So I was looking, and I started looking, and I was like, oh, chapter 16's got 24 verses. Last week we covered 12. I said, this is perfect. We're going to cover 12 tonight, and we're going to be, we'll be finished with 1 Corinthians. We'll start looking at a different book. Thought this was going to be perfect. Well, the Lord reminded me what Paul taught us last week. He reminded me I need to practice what I teach. And Paul started last week. He mentioned two main points. The first one was, give a little bit extra, stretch yourself a little bit more, right? You have your tithe that you're giving, but you can give to other organizations outside the church or within the church that are also doing the kingdom's work. But the second part of last week was that we got to give the Lord room to work. And sometimes his plan is going to be different from yours, and it's always going to be better, or at least so I've learned. And so I had to let his will be done because the Lord intervened. I was putting together tonight's lesson, and I got through one verse, and I was on page 6. And I said, well, they're not here for an hour and a half. I got to wrap this up. So we're going to cover 2 verses, and that's it. So if you thought, hey, I'm going to go to church tonight, and we're finally going to get out of 1 Corinthians, and we're going to be looking at something else, well, your disappointment has arrived. So sorry about that. But we are covering 2 verses, and I would like to tell you that next week we'll cover the remaining 10, but I'm not even going to get any more egg on my face. We'll just take it as it goes. We'll let the Lord work. And furthermore, before we jump into these 2 verses tonight, I did want to share briefly, I hope that you had the opportunity to reflect on those moments where God's will has really exposed itself in your life. As I was sharing about last week's lesson at a Bible study earlier this week, and it sort of hit me just how impactful God's will can be sometimes, or how it always is. Because I was thinking about very recently, and I shared this story with them. I said, when I returned to South Oak Ridge back in 2019, after Natalie and I got married, I took a very lackadaisical approach to getting involved with the church. I would help with a setup for something or a cleanup or with a kid's lesson every now and then, but I wasn't really plugging in. I wasn't getting in-depth involved, and I wouldn't commit to anything really. At the same time, I was looking for a second job. I was looking for some, a little bit of extra income to try to help our family and make things work. And I started really digging. I was like, do I want to go into a school administration? And I was like, no, not really, because, then you have, it's just a different ball game. I don't feel like I'm going to have the same relationship with the kids. I don't get to coach. So I kind of ruled that out. And so I was just looking for a little odd job at that point and said, what can I do? Started poking around a little bit. I didn't really say anything to anybody about it. I was just inquiring, not getting too serious. And it wasn't maybe 2 weeks after I had started to put my feelers out about other work that Chris came to me and said, hey, what about, we might be looking at a position at the church. Would you be interested? And I said, well, let me pray about it. But the immediate light bulb said yes. This is the Lord intervening. This is the Lord saying, why are you being a dummy? Let's get the ball on the roll and get plugged in. And that's exactly what happened. That was the Lord's will that brought me here. That's why I'm here before you tonight. I feel like there's a number of other stories I can tell you. It was the Lord's will that brought me back to living here. It was the Lord's will that brought me back to Forbush. So many ways where I really started to process this, and I was like, where would I be without the Lord's will? Probably off somewhere, miserable, sad, and I wouldn't be seeing your shining faces. So it wouldn't be fun. It wouldn't be good. But I hope that you gathered, as you look back, wow, his will can accomplish infinitely more than my own. And that's what I really gathered as I sort of started looking back and reflecting a little bit. So if you haven't already, take that time this week and just look back and say, well, the Lord's will really intervened right here. He really came in and saved me from myself. He stepped in those moments. And sometimes they're big moments. I just picked out a few big ones right there. But in other cases, they're small ones. And the small ones can mean just as much. So tonight, we're looking at sort of the conclusion of chapter 16. We're going to look at verse 13 first. And really these two verses, they're very short, and if you're looking at them, you're thinking, how's he gonna stretch this out? But very short, and it's just guidance and encouragement. And that's really what Paul is delivering here as this chapter starts to close. So we're just going to look at verse 13 to start, and we'll go from there. Keep alert, stand firm in your faith, be courageous, be strong. Simple, right? But it's loaded. To me, that is loaded. There is so much to dissect right there. Keep alert, stand firm in your faith, be courageous, and be strong. These are commands. He's not asking. He's saying, do these things. I expect this of you. This is what we need you to do here. And it's a great series of tips. And I think when Paul's delivering this message, he's saying to the church in Corinth, it's been hard getting things started, but the difficulty is not going to go away. This is still a hard road ahead. There's still work to be done. And with these words coming at the end of the letter, it sort of reminds me, this is like a parent, right? As the kid's about to head out the door, whether it's to school or to a friend's house or whatever it is, and the parent's hitting them with that last second information, hey, don't forget to cut the light off when you leave. Don't forget to grab your lunch. Don't forget to be careful. Call me when you get there. All those things that we're supposed to remember when we walk out the door. Don't forget this, that, and the other. And I also thought of that as if you know anything about Jewish traditions and you know a little bit about a mezuzah. So a mezuzah is basically parchment. It's scripture that you've put on a little piece of parchment, typically very specific stories from the Hebrew Bible, and you're going to put those on this little piece of parchment, and it's going to go on the interior doorposts in your house. Mezuzah, literal translation, is doorpost. And we talk about this in class about how that's a reminder, almost as if you walk out the door of your home, you're going to see that mezuzah, and it's the last thing. It's the reminder. I got to keep God's commands when I leave the house. I've got to remember that. When I go to certain churches and there's a sign in the parking lot that says you're now entering the mission field, that's kind of the same thing in my mind, where you're getting that last minute reminder. And that's going to be the last thing you see on the door. Those last three commands that Paul's given here, to me, this was kind of like his mezuzah. Here's your parchment to plaster on the door right here as before you leave, right? Don't forget these things. Make sure you remember them. And why does he do it? Well, it's all about the culture. He's saying to the Corinthian church right there, he's saying the culture around you is opposite of where the Lord wants you. And he's telling them this because he knows it's going to be tough. We've talked about how, sexual sin and immorality was a real issue in the city of Corinth and how Paul had to address that in the church. He's had to deal with people questioning the resurrection. He's had to deal with people questioning all these different teachings that he's delivered. And he's saying to them, it's not going to get any easier, so you need to do these things. You need to stay alert, stand firm in your faith, be courageous, and be strong. He commands it. And I think we see the same thing today. This is still absolutely relevant because the culture around us, what does it tell us? When you're listening to music, vulgar language is okay. When you're watching movies, nudity is okay. When, states around you legalize drugs, it's okay, right? We just all fall in line and we all go the same way. There's a whole host of other things that get involved here. And Paul knew this would happen in Corinth. He knew it was going to continue to happen. He knew this cultural battle would always happen. So he's reminding us right here, we got to stay rooted in our faith, seek the strength of the Lord as we go through these trials and difficulties. But the very first thing he said was the one that really caught my eye, and I saved that for the end right here. Back to the beginning of the verse, the first command, he says, be alert. Your translation might say be on guard or be watchful. Any of those three would be applicable right here. And before we dissect what Paul's saying, I want to go back real quick to what Jesus had to say about being alert. And so we're going to go back to Matthew chapter 24. And in Matthew 24, Jesus is very blunt and straightforward. He's basically saying, here's the way you can practice being alert and being prepared. So Matthew 24, And we're going to look at more verses of Matthew than we are of 1 Corinthians tonight. But we're looking at Matthew 24, 36 through 44. And your title on this little story might even say, it might even mention watchfulness or alertness. So Matthew 24, 36 through 44. But about that day and hour no one knows, neither the angels of heaven nor the Son, but only the Father. For as the days of Noah were, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. For as in those days before the flood they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day Noah entered the ark. And they knew nothing until the flood came and swept them all away. So too will be the coming of the Son of Man. Then two will be in the field, one will be taken, and one will be left. Two women will be grinding meal together, one will be taken, and one will be left. Keep awake, therefore, for you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. But understand this, if the owner of the house had known in what part of the night the thief was coming, he would have stayed awake and would not have let his house be broken into. Therefore, you also must be ready, for the Son of Man is coming at an unexpected hour. So Jesus is telling the believers right here, be on watch, right? Be alert for his return. He's speaking of the return of the Son of Man. The date, the time, they're unknown, right? We don't know those. They're unknown to everyone except the Lord, but we should be watchful. Make the most of our days on earth, because regardless of when our time is up, whether that is through passing on or whether that is through his return, each day brings us one day closer to that, right? Each day is one less day that we have to work with here on earth, and one less day that we have to live for the Lord on earth. And so he's saying, be watchful, be alert. It's as if you were to know when the thief was coming, you'd be watching. You would be alert. And it takes me back to a moment where we had a principal one time at school. He heard rumors of the senior prank coming. Well, he spent the night at the school and sat on the roof in a lawn chair. And he was ready, right? He said, I'm watchful, I'm alert. There's rumors swirling that tonight's the night. And so he was ready, he was there. And so that's exactly what Jesus is saying. Be alert, be prepared. So if we go back to that verse in 1 Corinthians, in 16, verse 13, Paul tells the Corinthians, he says, keep alert, right? Stay alert for a number of reasons, but certainly including watching out for false teachings. Watch out for those who are going to doubt the resurrection. These issues are not going to go away. These people are still going to be there. It's of utmost importance to stay alert. And the first thing that popped into my mind when I was thinking about, okay, where do we, on a daily basis, where do we have to stay alert? Where do we have to really, sort of bring keen our senses in? I was thinking about road construction. And we see those signs, right? And they'll sometimes say, be alert, or stay alert, or, keep watch, something along those lines. It's obvious why we want to stay alert. We were looking out for ourselves. We're looking out for other drivers. We're looking out for these construction workers. All these play a part. So when I was taking my bus driver's course, this was about 5 or 6 years ago, I guess, the first time I had to take it, I was amazed because I heard of one trick that these construction workers, these road workers, will use to make sure that you and I are alert, so that we're aware on the road. So when intersections change, right, maybe there's a new intersection that forms, they've built a new road, or there's an addition of a turn lane, or an intersection sees a big increase in traffic. Right? We often see new stoplights, installed, or traffic circles, right? Whatever it might be. So, but we think of stoplights. And when these new stoplights are installed, if you ever pay close attention, usually you'll come up to them for a week or two, and there's black plastic bags on top of them, right? They put these trash bags on top. And for the longest time I wondered, I'd ask mom and dad, I was like, why are there trash bags on the stoplights, right? Can't we get this figured out? Do they not work? Do we put bad stoplights up? Are we waiting on power to be hooked up to them? What's the reason? And the instructor told us in class that day, he said, it's so that you are alert, right? When you come into this intersection that you've drove through all your life, you've driven through this road, you run this same route every day to work or to school or to church, wherever you're going, you run the same route. You start to adapt, and your mind gets accustomed to these things, and you just start going through the motions, right? And you approach the stoplight, and you know how it works, so you just trust it. Sometimes you might run the light because you're not even paying attention. You think you know what it's going to do. So they put those bags there as a heads up to us, and they'll leave them there for days, sometimes weeks, so that change is coming. right? There is something that's about to happen here so that you don't absentmindedly roll up to this intersection and they've flipped the stoplight and they've put a new one up and it throws you off guard and it causes a wreck. So they're trying to get you to think twice and say, hey, maybe the next time I come through here, this intersection is going to be a little bit different. Maybe I need to pay closer attention. I need to be alert. So that's the purpose, right? And they leave them there intentionally. And those bags are there to keep us alert, to help us be on guard for what's coming. And that's what verse 13 is to me, for Paul. This is him putting the plastic bags on and saying, you got to be alert. You've got to be prepared, be ready at all times for what is coming. For the culture around you, you've got to be prepared, be watchful, because the world is knocking at your door. And this culture is not going to make being a believer easy. I think we've seen that, and it seems like sometimes it gets worse and worse, but this culture is going to pull at us, and it pulls us this way and that way. All ways lead away from the Lord, typically, in which the culture around us is going to pull us. They're going to tell us that our beliefs are antiquated. They're going to tell us that our beliefs are too restrictive, that we have no freedom because we're a believer, but we know the opposite is true, right? We know that the pleasuring ways of the world are brief. It's only there for a moment, but we know the ways of the Lord are eternal, and that's what Paul's saying. You've got to be alert and be watchful, because this culture is going to try to infiltrate and try to get inside of your relationship with Christ. So we're always vigilant. We transition to verse 14, which is where we conclude tonight. On verse 14, let all that you do be done in love. Let all that you do be done in love. It seems like a simple concept, right? It seems rather easy, but wow, how difficult it is to live out, because Paul's saying you can do all the good deeds you want in the world, but if they're not done with love, they're meaningless. They're useless. What are you really accomplishing? If they're not done with a loving heart, they're meaningless, because people can see through. A lot of times we look and we see somebody doing something and we're like, oh, they're just doing that because the person next to them is doing that, right? They're doing that out of obligation because they have to, not because they really want to. People can see where our actions are rooted. They can tell if love is involved or not. And Paul believed in that power of love, right? He wrote an entire chapter about it, and we've already covered it. But we're going to go back to it really fast. In 1 Corinthians 13, so backtrack with me, just maybe a page or two. We don't have to go back far. In 1 Corinthians 13, we're just going to look back at verses 4 through 7 one more time, because this is where he gives us the definition of love. So he's telling us tonight, let all that you do be done in love. Well, if you forgot what love was, I'm forgetful. Sometimes I forget things. So if you forgot what love was, let's look at it defined once more. 1 Corinthians 13, 4 through 7, love is patient, love is kind, love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So what's he telling us to do? He's telling us to love in that manner, in that exact way. And some of your translations may say, when you're looking back at verse 13, some of your translations may say, let all that you do be done with love. But I really like the ones that say in love, right? Because in means you're surrounded by it. With just means it's alongside, right? It's along for the ride. But in means you're surrounded by love. You're engulfed by it. You're not just, placing an order with a side of love. No, you're getting love with the whole thing. And Paul wants all that we do to be enveloped with patience, with kindness, with humility, with hope, endurance, all these things he just defined for us, and love. So when we face situations where inevitably we don't agree with somebody, we're at a disagreement, we can still disagree, but approach that situation in a loving manner. It can be hard. It's almost like we're taught to do the opposite. We're taught not to have, loving banter amongst one another. We're taught to, dig in and really get aggressive with our stances. And that's not what Paul's saying here. He says you can approach these situations with love. If you know somebody who's struggling with a sin, yeah, you want to address it. You want to call them out on it. You want to bring that to their attention. But you can do that in a loving manner and not shame them in front of everybody and not approach it in an aggressive way. If we go into these situations without love, it's a game changer, right? If we have love on our side, it makes things easier. And Paul is saying that here at the end to remind the Corinthians, you've brought forth to me so many issues within your church. But he's telling them right here, if you approach them with love, so many of them are going to go away. Right? It's as simple as that. Bring love to the table. So his guidance tonight, right? It's short, it's simple, but it's important. Be alert, be vigilant, always be watchful and aware. The culture around us is out to get us, right? It's out to pull us away from the Lord. So we want to make sure that, what we do is of the Lord and not of the world. Stand firm in our faith so that we don't fall into these traps that the world presents us, and do everything in love. That's the hard part, I feel like. Do everything in love, but whatever we do it in love. I do have a few prayer requests to mention tonight right off the top. First off, a very quick praise. Paige and Alan welcomed their baby girl this morning, so that was quick, right? Didn't take long at all, but Mom and Dad and Brooklyn all are doing well. John, is he here tonight? Did I see John when I ran in? He's at home, okay. But doing well as far as I know. The surgery went well, so keep John in your prayers. Junior Comer is at home. Chris said he's just dealing with a little weakness, so keep him in your prayers. Jason Revis doing better. We mentioned UE's home, but keep him in your prayers as well. Continue to pray for Zoe and Jody. Paris Green, who's just joined the church this past week with us. She's got a big job interview this Friday, so if y'all can remember her on Friday morning. And then her grandfather was just diagnosed with lung cancer today. So keep her and her family in your prayers. Are there any others? Okay. So Nancy's daughter and her husband trying to adopt. So we'll definitely keep them in our prayers. Others? All right. I'm going to call on Jamie to close us out in prayer tonight.
Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for a beautiful Wednesday evening. Just thank you for the sunshine and the beautiful flowers and the trees that's blooming. And we just thank you for Justin as he's brought tonight's message. It's just a great reminder to encourage us to stand strong in our faith, to be courageous. And in everything that we do it in love. These are such powerful verses. They're short verses, but they're so powerful. I just pray that you just help each and every one of us this week as believers to be reminded of these verses as we apply them to our lives and our daily decisions, especially in today's society and culture. Be with the ones that's been mentioned in prayer. Just be with Alan and Paige as they work with the family. The surgery that was mentioned, the healings, the adoptions, the job interviews. We were several prayers tonight, but I just pray that Jesus let each of them and everyone up. Be with these, all of us as we go throughout the rest of this week. And just thank you for loving each and every one.